After 500,000 years drifting through the void, the Orion starship Elysium finally returned home. Her hull once gleaming with the pride of Earth's greatest engineering was now dulled by time and space debris. The plating bore scars from meteoroid storms, forgotten battles, and the long, lonely journey through uncharted galaxies. She groaned softly, almost like a sleeping giant stirring as Earth's gravity gently tugged at her frame. Beneath the layers of shielding and artificial intelligence, the ship had a soulless, silent witness to humanity's last desperate gamble. Inside the cryo chamber, Admiral Kyra's soul stirred. Her breath fogged the glass of the pod as the nutrient. Fluid drained, leaving behind cold skin and aching limbs. The hypersleep had preserved her body, but time had still left its fingerprints. Muscles would take time to wake, memories longer. Her eyelashes fluttered, dry and heavy, until her eyes opened slowly to the familiar flicker of low emergency lights. "Welcome back, Admiral," said a soft, feminine voice in her earpiece. It was Eva, the ship's cognitive interface. Artificial, but warm, comforting, loyal. "You are home." Home. Kyra's lips parted, but no sound came out. She sat up slowly, her hands trembling as she grasped the edges of the pod. Her mind, still sluggish, began assembling fragments of memory like scattered stars aligning. Earth, Mission Orion, the Exodus. Her last moment before sleep, launching into darkness, hoping to find a future among the stars. She rose, steadying herself on the cold floor, and made her way to the command deck. What she saw outside the panoramic window made her freeze mid-step. Earth, but not the Earth. She remembered where once there were sprawling concrete megacities, now there were endless emerald canopies. Forests ancient and thick spilled over mountain ranges and coastlines like a wild green tide. Skyscrapers had vanished beneath layers of moss and ivy. The oceans shimmered brighter, deeper, as if the planet had been reborn. And then there were the structures. Massive, dome-like habitats pulsing with bioluminescence, breathing softly as though they were alive. The colors danced across their surfaces, green, gold, and deep azure like the heartbeat of a slumbering giant. Kyra stood frozen, not from fear, but awe. She reached out and touched the glass as if it could help her understand. "Eva," she said, her voice still hoarse, "give me the latest Earth survey report." Biosphere integrity, 97%. Air purity, optimal. Radiation, negligible. Surface architecture, non-mechanical. Population indicators. Unknown, Eva replied. Unknown. That word echoed like thunder in her ears. They had left Earth 500,000 years ago. In those days, humanity had been at war with itself. Nations collapsed under the weight of greed. Climate systems spiraled out of control. Oceans rose. Governments fell. The Orion Collective had been assembled as a last resort. Scientists, engineers, cultural archivists, and a few hardened leaders tasked with one purpose: to find a new home before the old one turned to ash. Kyra had watched the launch through, her visor, Earth burning beneath her. And now it was whole again. "Bridge crew," she whispered, activating the neural summon. "Wake them, all of them." Within moments, the other cryopods lit up like stars being born. Marovan, the engineer, with iron hands and a heart buried under layers of sarcasm, blinked in confusion as he sat up. "Am I still dreaming, or did we just park in the middle of a jungle?" Selachor, thin as a reed and sharp as obsidian, was already pulling on her uniform. Her eyes darted to the viewport and she let out a quiet, stunned laugh. "But that's Earth. No way. We must be in the wrong system. That looks too alive." And finally, Jacques Oren, silent as always, stood tall at the edge of the room, fully awake even before the others. The war never really left his posture. Even after 500,000 years, he moved like a man one step from combat. His eyes, however, lingered on the forests below. Something in them softened, if only for a moment. Kyra took a deep breath. She had been trained for countless scenarios: hostile worlds, diplomatic crises, even total planetary extinction. But nothing in the simulations had ever prepared her for the idea that Earth might outgrow its own sickness. "We're not orbiting a ruin," she said aloud. We're orbiting something evolved. Morrow leaned over a console, fingers dancing across displays. No transmissions. No satellites, no electromagnetic chatter at all, but power signatures. Everywhere, they're not from machines. It's like the planet itself is humming. Kyra walked to the center of the deck. This changes everything. She stared at the world that had once sent her to the stars, now completely alien. It was both breathtaking and deeply unsettling. After a long silence, she spoke the words that would begin the next chapter of their journey. "Prep the shuttle," she said, voice steady now. "We're going down." The shuttle sliced through Earth's skies like a forgotten echo from a history no one remembered. As it pierced the upper atmosphere, its hull shimmered, briefly reflecting the soft hues of a sky that looked bluer, deeper, and somehow wiser than it had in any of the records. There were no transmissions, no air traffic, no warnings, no satellites locking on. No weapons preparing to fire, only the rustle of wind over vast treetops like a giant breathing slowly in its sleep. The shuttle's descent was gentle, the automated landing sequence guiding them toward coordinates where once the mighty city of Cairo had stood a sprawl of dust, heat, and stone. But now, no trace of the Sahara remained. As the shuttle's legs touched the soil, a blanket of green stretched out in every direction. Towering trees, some broader than any skyscraper, arched into the heavens, their leaves shimmering faintly as though infused with starlight. Vents glowed softly in the underbrush, casting gentle patterns across the clearing. The scent of wild jasmine, ozone, and unfamiliar blossoms filled the air. No desert. No ruins, no relics of the past, only rainforest. Thick, untouched, and impossibly alive, the bay doors hissed open, and Admiral Kyra Sol led her team down the ramp. The moment her boots touched Earth's soil, she felt it, not just gravity, but presence. The air was warmer than she'd expected, and it carried a resonance. Something primal, ancient, as though the planet was aware of them. She inhaled deeply. The oxygen levels were perfect, richer, almost intoxicating. Clean in a way she hadn't experienced since her childhood, before the skies turned gray and the rivers began to die. This air wasn't just breathable. It was healing. Sella Kor, the xenobiologist, stepped ahead of her, crouching near a thick fern that pulsed with soft bioluminescence. She touched it gently, and it curled inward like a shy animal. "It's not just evolved flora," she whispered. "It's reactive. Intelligent." Morrow Van knelt beside her, his scanner clicking softly. "Some of these compounds aren't even on the periodic table." Then came the sound that froze them in place. Footsteps, soft, rhythmic, dozens of them. Moving as one from the edge of the emerald wall, they emerged, figures cloaked in garments unlike anything the Orion crew had ever seen. Their robes weren't woven, but grown, the fabric moving slightly with each breath, like a second skin. The colors shifted gently with their emotions, subtle hues dancing like ripples. Across a pond, and their tattoos. Lines of glowing ink stretched from their fingertips to their throats and across their faces, pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats. The designs weren't static. They flowed, changed shape, adapted. Language, art, and identity, all at once. At the center of them stood a tall woman, regal in her bearing, her presence as commanding as Kyra's own. Her skin gleamed like polished obsidian under the filtered sunlight. Her silver eyes, devoid of pupils, shimmered like moons caught in dusk. She stepped forward, raising one hand not in aggression, but with a grace that suggested ancient ceremony. Kyra raised hers slowly in return. The woman spoke, her voice calm and fluid, like wind brushing over water. "Welcome," she said. "To Terra, you are late." Kyra blinked. Her heart pounded. "You know us?" "We remember," the woman replied, her head tilting ever so slightly. "Your ancestors left this world in fire and steel. We stayed and healed it." There was no accusation in her voice, just fact. The silence that followed hung heavy in the air as Kyra tried to process what she was hearing. These weren't some isolated survivors. They were something more. The woman introduced herself as Matra, the voice of the Ejukara. The Ejukara were not a nation, not a government. They were the stewards of Earth, descendants of those who had refused to flee when humanity's time seemed over. The ones who had buried the old world, not in mourning but in purpose. In the aftermath of collapse, when the oceans surged and cities drowned, when the machines turned on each other and the skies turned black, some chose not to escape. They chose to change. The Ejikara had rebuilt, not with steel and circuits, but with seed and sun. They learned to bond with the planet rather than conquer it. Their cities were living ecosystems. Their technology was biosymphonic, fused with the natural world, speaking its language. Their energy came from the sea tides, from sun-fed mycelium networks, and from massive biocores that pulsed in harmony with tectonic rhythms. They didn't fly through the stars. They flew within them. And now humanity's lost children had returned, and were met not with hostility, but curiosity. Kyra's team was invited cautiously, but without resistance, into one of the great domes. It wasn't a structure in the traditional sense, but a breathing, living sanctuary grown over centuries. Inside, it felt like stepping into the heart of the planet. Light filtered through the ceiling in swirling patterns. Trees and streams moved to accommodate them, reshaping corridors like veins adjusting to new blood. Over the next days, they observed, Sela was overwhelmed. She'd studied alien life for decades, and yet nothing compared to the flora and fauna of the new Earth. She discovered plants that sang in harmony when touched, and flowers that whispered old stories when bathed in moonlight. Morrow worked closely with Ejikara bioweavers, learning their fusion of logic and life. His mechanical mind struggled at first, but slowly he began to see it not just as innovation, but as evolution. Jax stayed mostly silent, watching from shadows. He noticed the way Ejikara guards watched them, not unkindly, but always carefully, because Kyra saw it too. Behind the Ejikara smiles, behind their gentle hospitality and soothing voices, there was something else. Not hatred. Not suspicion. But fear, the kind that runs deep in your bones when an old nightmare walks through the door you thought you'd sealed forever. And Kyra began to wonder, what did they think we had come back to do? It started as something small, harmless even. One of the Ejikara children, barely taller than Kyra's waist, with wide amber eyes and flickering green tattoos like ivy crawling across her cheeks, wandered too close to Jax. He stood at the edge of the learning grove, arms folded, his demeanor calm but alert as always. The girl was curious, fascinated by his uniform, the matte armor, the foreign smell of metal and ozone. Her tiny fingers reached toward his side and brushed against the holstered weapon at his hip. The response was immediate and explosive. Two Ejikara elders, who had been calmly speaking with Sela nearby, suddenly moved with a speed that defied their serene posture. They did not shout, but their tattoos flared a warning red, and the surrounding flora responded. The grass stiffened. The air crackled. Vines twitched along the walls of the grove. The girl was pulled back gently, but swiftly. Other children ushered away. The adults gathered, whispering in a language of tones and vibrations that Kyra's translator couldn't decipher. Jax hadn't moved, not visibly, but Kyra could tell his fingers had hovered near the safety trigger. Later that evening, the council met. The visitors from Elysium were not invited. Their presence was suddenly like that of ghosts, felt, but not welcomed. Ejikara conversations slowed to a hush when the Orion crew passed. Eyes lingered a second too long. Smiles became thin, practiced. Even the dome they had been allowed to stay in began to feel smaller. Kyra requested an audience with Matra. It was granted. They met again in the Hilo chamber, a space grown from crystalline bark and roots that shimmered in soft blue hues. The chamber was sacred, Kyra had been told, where truth was spoken and echoed through the walls for generations to remember. Matra stood tall and still at the chamber center, surrounded by organic pillars that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Her silver eyes were unreadable. Kyra stepped forward. What happened today was a misunderstanding. Jax meant no harm. I know, Matra said. He moved like one who has seen too much harm to cause it lightly. Kyra exhaled in relief. But Matra's voice dropped lower, and her next words came like the quiet fall of a blade. but it was not the weapon that caused fear. It was the memory of it. She turned, and the shimmering tattoos across her arms shifted, forming an image of a great storm of fire raining from the sky, cities burning, oceans boiling, great machines devouring forests. You were a myth to us, Matra continued. A legend of fire and thunder. Of cold skies and burning oceans, the skyfallers we called you. The ones who left Earth bleeding and did not look back. Mothers told the story to children, of the old ones who flew away in steel coffins and broke the world behind them. She paused, turning to face Kyra, and now the myth has returned. Kyra's voice caught in her throat. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged by the actions of ancestors, but never like this. Never with the weight of 500,000 years behind it. We left because we had to, she said, steadying her breath. Earth was dying. We thought we were its last chance. Matra watched her silently. We were scientists, engineers, survivors, not conquerors. Intent, Matra said softly, means little to a planet scorched by its children. The silence that followed was deep and long. The chamber itself seemed to absorb the weight of their words. Holding them gently, eventually, Matra nodded once. You may remain, for now, observed. Not trusted, not yet. Trust, like life, must regrow. Kyra accepted the terms with grace, even though part of her chest ached. She couldn't blame them. If her people had stayed behind, if they had clawed their way back from ash and ruin and raised their children among wildflowers instead of concrete, they would tell stories too. Stories to warn, to protect. And if those stories had names and faces that matched hers, then maybe she would have felt that same fear back at the guest dome. She found Jock staring up at the sky. The Elysium's still in low orbit, he said, without turning, just hovering. Kyra followed his gaze. Beyond the canopy, a pale glimmer moved gently among the stars, silent, patient. Their ship, their ark, she nodded. We may need her soon. Because of them? He asked. Kyra shook her head slowly. No, because of us. She didn't say the rest aloud. That the Elysium carried more than memories. More than technology. It held old secrets, abandoned projects, archived histories of war protocols built in times of desperation and fear. Systems that had been buried beneath layers of command security for their own protection, and Earth. Earth had not forgotten how to defend itself either, even as it grew forests and healed oceans. It had developed something deeper, subterranean networks that blinked with bioluminescent intelligence. Ecosystems that responded to emotion. Neural webs of plant and fungal consciousness that spanned continents like a sleeping god's nervous system. Sela had seen it. She had tried to map the root signals, but what she found looked less like biology and more like intention. Earth had evolved past humans. And now the children of its past had returned, whether as guests or as threats. Remained to be seen. On the 6th day, it happened. They had just begun to believe the silence meant peace. The morning was golden, filtered through translucent leaf domes above their quarters. The breeze carried songs from birds no human had ever named. Sela had even laughed that morning, her first real laugh since they landed. Jox had been sharpening his blade with slow, ritualistic motions, while Morrow calibrated the bioadapters on his gauntlet, trying to interface better with Ejikara tech. And Kyra had been watching the sky. Something about it had felt off. Too. Still. Too patient. And then the ground shook. Not the tremor of tectonic unrest, not the rumble of weather. This was mechanical, deep, like the waking breath of an old god buried in stone. The Ejikara children froze. Elders turned their heads, tattoos flickering amber, then red. The dome above shimmered, distorted, and then split open to reveal the sky. Light appeared far above them. Not sunlight. It was a narrow, impossible beam of condensed ancient fury lancing down from the black above with unholy precision. It struck just beyond the edge of the Ejikara settlement. The earth screamed as 100 trees disintegrated into ash. A pulse wave rippled through the rainforest, snapping branches, tearing leaves into dust. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not a blast, a scream. a sound like the sky itself had been torn in half. Kyra's ears rang. Her balance faltered. She turned toward the direction of the beam's origin, and there it was, high above the stratosphere. A long dormant orbital platform had awakened, blackened by age, marked with the insignia of a long-dead Earth government. The lettering was faded, but unmistakable. "Old world tech," Morrow said, staring up in horror. "It's not Kyra, it's us. It's our tech, we built that." Kyra's come crackled to life, but it wasn't a voice that answered. It was static, a whisper of dead code, murmuring in encryption last spoken 500,000 years ago. The second strike didn't hit the jungle. It hit a section of one of the living towers, an outer node, a communication stock. It vaporized instantly, no explosion. Just annihilation. Sirens began to wail, but not from speakers. From the wind itself. The Ejukara had no mechanical alarms. Their warnings came from the trees, from the fungal networks, from the groaning of the canopy as the planet itself responded. Vines retracted. Domes pulled their walls closed like clenched fists. Towers split and folded into armored configurations. Drones, organic, glowing constructs shaped like hawks and wasps, launched into the air, circling, scanning. The jungle turned from garden to war form in seconds. Kyra's voice cut through the chaos. "Move!" They ran. Sella limped, badly injured by falling shards of organic glass from the collapsing tower. Blood streaked down her leg. Kyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed her by the waist and hoisted her up, muscles screaming under the weight, and Jax took rear guard. His pulse rifle spun to life, old world tech lighting up for the first time in centuries. He aimed for one of the incoming drones and Ejukara defensive construct, but unable to distinguish friend from foe in the panic. He fired once. The drone exploded mid-air, scattering luminous spores into the wind. Another beam struck, grazing the ground to their left. A tree vaporized, dirt hissed into steam. They hit the forest floor hard, smoke curling around them. "It's us!" Morrow shouted, crouched over a portable console. His hands flew across the holographic interface. "The system doesn't recognize the Ejukara. It doesn't care. It's targeting anything anomalous." Kyra crouched beside him. "Can you disable it?" Morrow's lips pressed into a tight line. "No, not from here, not with this gear." He pulled a thin black cylinder from his belt and jabbed it into the mossy ground, a hardline interface. Maybe I can talk to it. You speak machine?" "I speak old Earth defense architecture," Morrow snapped. "I trained in the archive ruins on Europa. This code is fossilized, but it's speaking. It just doesn't remember us." Another drone screeched past. Jocks fired again. This one dropped in flames, but not before it released a shock pulse that shook their console and shattered a nearby biocrystal. Sella gasped in pain. Her leg had gone pale. Kyra tightened her grip on her friend, jaw clenched. Then something changed. Morrow's eyes widened. The interface glowed. "It's listening," he whispered. The System Elysium's orbit triggered an auto-defense reaction, an identification scan. It saw us, didn't recognize us, and defaulted to threat protocol, but he paused. "But I gave it a key from the old days, buried in Elysium's core logs. I forced it to run a memory trace." The light from the sky flickered. The drones halted. "No. More beams. No more shrieking sky. Just silence, heavy, waiting." Then the sound of organic life resumed. A cicada, a low, moaning root shift. The breathing of the trees. Jax lowered his weapon. Slowly, Kyra set Sella down on a mossy bank as Morrow sagged backward in exhaustion. His fingers trembling from neural feedback. He hadn't deactivated the system. He had made it remember dulled. Earth's eye of the one built to kill anything that didn't. Looked like a human had scanned their faces. Their DNA, their suits, their insignias, their ship. And something had clicked, buried deep beneath layers of corruption and dust. The code had recognized them, not as invaders, but as children returned. Above, the platform powered down, drifting quietly again in the shadows of space. Its lens dimmed, its purpose paused. Ejukara? They emerged from the jungle edge like specters, silent, watching, dozens of them, their tattoos no longer glowing, faces pale. Eyes wide, one elder stepped forward and fell to her knees, not in reverence but in awe and terror. "You woke the sky?" Kyra said nothing, because deep down, she wasn't sure if they had just silenced a threat or reminded the planet that the destroyers of old still lived. Either way, Earth would not forget. Later, under the soft pulse of bioluminescent light inside the central dome, the Grand Council of the Ejikara gathered. The chamber was unlike anything Kyra's soul had ever stepped into, not forged by machines, but grown. Vines the size of trees spiraled into archways. Petals glistened from the ceilings, humming low tones, resonating with emotion. It was like standing inside the living heart of the planet. There were no thrones, no banners, just a circle, equal, distance between all, harmony woven into the very structure. Kyra stood in the center. No weapon on her hip, no armor on her chest. Her face was uncovered, her voice unfiltered. Behind her stood Maro, Sala, and Jocks, wounded, quiet and watchful. Their uniforms were stained, torn from the earlier chaos, but they made no move to stand tall or superior. They were guests now, not warriors. The council was silent. Dozens of eyes, some silver, some golden, all unnervingly calm, watched her. Studied her. And then she spoke. Her voice did not shake. It rang with something ancient, a pain buried under centuries of ice and time, a truth carried across light years and starless sleep. "We are not your past," she said. A pause. Some faces tensed. "We are your cousins, your echoes. We carry the memory of a broken earth, not because we wanted to, but because it was all we had left. The old world failed. We were launched into the dark with hope and desperation tangled. Together," she stepped forward. The air itself seemed to still. "But we've changed. We've endured the abyss. We've seen what silence does to the soul. We are not here to reclaim or command. We are here because we never stopped believing home existed." Her words floated into the bioacoustic field that made up the chamber's soundscape. Not just heard, but felt. The vines above shimmered. The petals vibrated gently. "We ask only this," Kyra said, her eyes sweeping across the circle. "Let us prove it. Not with promises, but with presence, with listening, with learning. We can be more than the ashes we were born from." Stillness. Then Matra stepped forward, the speaker. Her robes flowed like woven starlight. Her silver eyes held centuries, maybe more. The glowing tattoos across her arms pulsed slowly, not with emotion, but with control. She raised her hand, palm open, as the chamber dimmed slightly. The vines quieted. The petals retracted. Her voice came soft, calm, like water gently breaking on stone. "You speak with honesty and burden. You carry a fire you did not ignite, but which once burned this world to its bones." She stepped closer. "You will be allowed to stay, to share, to walk our forest, to learn. But know this," her eyes locked with Kyra's, and for a heartbeat the air turned sharp. Any step toward domination, any whisper of the past trying to reclaim what it lost. "And Terra will remember the fire you once brought." The words weren't a threat. They were a promise etched into the bones of a reborn. Planet. Kyra bowed her head, slowly, not in defeat. In peace. She let out the breath she didn't realize she'd held since re-entry. A murmur passed through the council. Not disagreement. Not applause. Agreement. Acceptance. A new chapter began. Not one of conquest, not one of return, but one of reckoning. Of redemption. Asterisk. In the weeks that followed, the Orion crew helped repair the damaged outer tower. Sela was gifted a strand of living vine that healed her wound and, in time, began to resonate with her heartbeat. Jocks joined in Ejikara hunt patrols, not to kill, but to learn the rhythms of nature, the way predators hunted without waste or cruelty. Maro was granted access to a library grown from coral and star fungus. Knowledge etched into living fibers, pulsing with memories stored in light. And Kyra sat often beneath the ancestor tree monument grown from the DNA of ancient Earth flora, intertwined with human genes. She spoke to it, not for answers, but to remember, because though they had returned, Earth had not waited. Earth had evolved, adapted, healed without them, and it had welcomed them. Not as masters or founders, but as wayward children, long lost, now found. The Orion starship still orbited high above, silent, watching, a relic of the stars. But down below, on the soil of a reborn world, something new was taking root. Not a second chance, a new beginning, and this time they would not forget.